Hello, everyone. I want you to imagine for a moment being in your mind, thinking in your mind, and being alone in your mind with something that you've experienced in life, something that you've been through. You know, we've been talking about trauma experiences lately on the show. And imagine what you would do with that. And I would submit to you that the dangers of being alone with that information, no one else in the world knowing it, is not a good idea. So today on the show, we're going to deal with that. We're going to talk about abandonment, sexual trauma, and recovery with a lady that is near and dear to our hearts. We know her as Leslie Nafus. So welcome through A Therapist's Eyes. I'm Chris Gazdick. He is Craig Graves. I'm a mental health and substance abuse therapist. I do have a book available soon, I should say, Mr. Graves. You know, I have a little bit of an announcement about all that. It's crazy. It's weird. I'm tripping on it. I actually called you the day of, right? You recall? So more on that in a second. He is an unbeatable mind coach, and he has a website, wininyourmind.com. So through a therapist's eyes, see the world through the lens of a therapist and a coach, being aware it's not delivery of therapy services in any way. Check out the website through a therapist's eyes.com, where you can get full show transcriptions and other fun things such as books we talk about on the show, and a nice search category for all the shows on specific topics that are interesting to you. So, Mr. Graves, this is the human emotional experience. Shall we figure this thing out together?
Let's do it.
All right. So, yeah, a little announcement. I don't even know, you know, the simple thing that's happened, as you know, the other day, Craig, you know, the guys at Morgan James Publishing have evidently made this thing available. You can go get it now. It's crazy. Amazon.com and Audible and various places. The electronic version is now out. Okay, so here's what I think I'm going to do with that. Hopefully you two, Mr. Neal's with us, our producer, and Craig, you're hopefully going to help me make some calls and stuff on a push. Okay, there's a little thing I'm going to let the listening audience know. You are the first to know. I guess everybody knows now, but you are the first to know when this comes out. Gosh, when does this come out? Actually, real quick, Neal, when does the show get produced? It's
next week.
So this will be a week from today, which is the 3rd. Okay, boy. So the listening audience, you're not going to have a lot of notice with this, but I have an ask to make. And the ask that I have to make is that Amazon.com or Amazon works in such a way where, you know, if you get a certain amount of people to get the electronic version of the book at the same time, it's a little trick in the trade that I'm learning a lot of things about, Mr. Graves. And so I'm going to ask on December the 18th is sort of a push day that I'm looking to get people to jump on to Amazon.com, check out Through a Therapist's Eyes. Mr. Neal reminds me that they changed the subtitle, Re-Understanding Emotions and Becoming Your Best Self. Did I get it right that time?
Yes.
He says thumbs up. All right. So Through a Therapist's Eyes, I'm kind of excited it's available now, but let's push on the 18th. If you would be so kind to help that process out, I would appreciate that. You got anything to add, Mr. Graves?
I don't. Congratulations. That's all I have to add.
Convincing words, or, you know, convincing words to push people to the December the 18th.
Yeah, December the 18th.
Repeat it. All right, what are we doing tonight? Abandonment and sexual trauma and recovery with Miss Leslie Nafus. So check this out, man. Speaking of Amazon, international best-selling author, I guess, Leslie, you are one. Is that so?
That is true. I am.
Congratulations. That is super cool. Professional copywriter, coach, speaker, wife, mom, and lifelong entrepreneurial who helps women and men become better entrepreneurs by teaching them the foundational skills they need to start and grow a successful business. And you have a website. What is this website?
It is www.leslienafus.com.
L-I or L-E-S, right? Wait a minute. How do you spell it?
LESLIENAFUS.com.
Fantastic. I didn't want to screw it up, and I already did. How are you today, man? What's been going on over there, and where are you at?
I am just outside of Reno, Nevada, near Tahoe, and things are pretty darn good. I have no real complaints. Upright, breathing, COVID-free, you know, all the things that are important these days.
That is important in 2020. Craig, anytime I meet somebody from the West, you know what I think about?
What's that?
Think about on the show what we want to do going out west. You remember?
Completely blank.
Slot canyoning.
Huh?
Slot
Oh,
canyoning.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Leslie, you know anything about slot canyoning?
Not.
Yes, this is this cool thing that this show guest told us about. So anytime I meet somebody from the West in any regard, I always think of her describing, it's now on my bucket list, to where you go into a Grand Canyon that's squeezed into like a 2 or 3 foot wide canyon that evidently you like traverse down in. Does that not sound like a blast?
No comment.
No comment. I have to do this. I'm going to come out and meet you. We're going to go slot canyoning.
Okay, fair enough. I'm a scuba diver. I've done a little bit of cave diving, nothing serious, just pass-throughs and stand-upables. But all right, as long as I can breathe the air while we're doing that, all right, I'll go with you.
She went 13 times before she successfully did it.
Yeah.
How long was she on keto before the 13th time?
I don't know about that.
But Leslie, let's dial in a little bit here. And I kind of thought I'd start out by, before we even get to the story and stuff of what happened, what do you do? I guess part of what we thought might fit nicely, because we've done a few shows recently on trauma. And it's a big deal. Huge experience that somebody has in their life, and recovering from trauma can be a lifelong battle, and sometimes that people never engage. Sometimes they engage it very quickly, but we thought would bookend it a little bit with a live person that, does the work and helps people as well through it. So what do you do? How do you help people with trauma? Just a short inlet on, how do you engage with that before we get going?
Well, as you know, trauma has pretty obvious symptoms most of the time. And I am not a mental health professional. I do this more from the lay minister side, lay counseling through a church. So I want to qualify that. But, trauma is pretty common, actually. And most people who have it have experienced it multiple times in different ways. And as you know, everyone functions differently. And so what's traumatic for one person may not be traumatic at all for another, and vice versa. We're all so individual in that way. So most of the time when I'm talking with people, and I do transformational coaching, that's kind of how I like to put that, that verbiage on it. I like to help people come into a good transformation from where they are to where they want to be. So we just talk. And I listen to them, and I've done some training to spot trauma symptoms. If someone is in a severe place with maybe PTSD or especially battle-induced PTSD, I often refer them to a licensed therapist, because that's the best step for that. But I will listen to them, and we use healing prayer, where we walk them through the trauma. And as someone who is a believer in Jesus Christ, I believe that He has provided for all of us to have healing through that. It looks a little bit different for everyone. Talking to God isn't just bowing your head and closing your eyes and folding your hands. It can be a running conversation. And that's the primary way that I help people discover and heal from trauma. Another thing that I do is I help them with journaling classes. Journaling is, I believe, we heal in community. So journaling is never a substitute for healing in community. You heal with people. So it's a good come alongside to help that healing process. So I teach journaling classes on that. And yeah, that's pretty much how I walk through people, listening.
There is a lot there to unpack for sure, right?
I can come back.
Yeah. We are going to unpack that. And the reason why I kind of set that up that way, I was thinking about, meeting and talking together, and you had agreed to share some of the actual experiences and whatnot. And so, it's funny because, when you sometimes therapists have our own lives and we have our own life experiences, and people forget that, and we forget when we're in any kind of format, the helping kind of world, the reality of our own stuff is real. And we do professionally anyway, our best to kind of be objective, which you learn how to be and you learn how to do. But I think that part of what we wanted to do is put a live, a face on this, a story on this, and in a real way follow up some of the shows that we did the last few weeks on trauma, and really kind of look at how does that really work? Like, what is that process? And I appreciate your courageous willingness to talk about that. So if you're open to it still, maybe she's not Mr. Graves. Maybe she's like, oh hell, that's not, no. What happened? What's the story and what happened? We're talking about, and I loved, as you said, by the way, too, what can be traumatic to one is not traumatic to another, and I think that's a key thing I wanted to highlight real quick too, because a lot of times people are dealing with trauma reactions, as you said, and we talked about that. We're not going to cover PTSD symptoms and symptoms of trauma today, because we've talked about that last show extensively. But boy, people will think, well, what happened to me wasn't so bad, right? Why am I having these responses? And so don't do that, I guess, is a message from the get-go here. Does that make sense?
Sure. Don't judge yourself.
Yeah.
By other people's experiences. Your life and your story is unique, and you are you, and you have these experiences, and they're real, and your responses to them are real. And just because your story isn't the same as someone else's doesn't mean that you weren't affected negatively by something. And so you need to feel and understand that your trauma responses are legitimate.
Right.
They
Absolutely.
are God-given response to help in survival situations. And it doesn't matter what your situation was. If you're experiencing that, that is real.
And it's funny, because I like the way, what are we, Craig, 200 plus shows in or whatever, and we've covered trauma before, but I don't think we've ever made that point before, and when you said that, it stuck out to me as like, that's something that needs to be said, and something that I see all the time. People, do not, we do judge ourselves, and we don't give ourselves, a legitimate outreach when we need that, because it's like, this wasn't that bad. Well,
right.
Yeah.
Apparently it was.
Right?
Apparently it was. Because, I know that there's some hesitancy to compare, a trauma survivor, maybe sexual abuse, car accident, abusive family PTSD with battle PTSD. But the effects are often similar. And it's not to denigrate battle-caused PTSD or slight that, or, our vets need great attention for that. They really do. But PTSD happens from other things, right? So trauma responses, other kinds of trauma responses, maybe more mild than PTSD, happen from other occurrences. I have talked to people who have been through a parent's divorce, not violent, not nasty, it just happened. And they experienced trauma from that for a long time. They didn't, and just like you said, they wanted to minimize that.
Right.
Oh, I remember this, my life isn't that bad. And yet here they find themselves in a chair across from somebody else, right, saying, why do I react like this? Right? And that's where I found myself.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard of something called acute stress disorder. It's actually something, it's like a watered down PTSD. But then even furthermore, watered down from that, I would say, I had, experiences being in a hospital when I was a kid. I had ear infections year in and year out, and horrible reactions from the anesthesia. And it affects me today. When I walk into a hospital, man, I don't like it. I still have to sort of recover myself a little bit,
That's a traumatic experience for a kid, and especially when it happens in childhood, because you are usually dependent on adults to care for you, and you find yourself in a situation and you don't know how to respond, and it's painful and it's scary and it's unfamiliar. So there's You don't need to justify having a trauma response to something. You just need to accept that that is the truth, that this hurt me, that this scared me, that this gave me trauma, and and go with that and pursue your healing. You know, it's not a matter of degree. Maybe treatment is a matter of degree, but acknowledging it and appreciating it is not a matter of degree. You know, I know people who have lost limbs who have less trauma than people who have gone through a parental divorce.
Right. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. It's so cool because I'm really glad, Leslie, that point or set of points there came out. So let's get into what happened. So, you know, with abandonment trauma, we've talked a lot about abandonment on the show, actually, in some different contexts, particularly of attachment relationships and marriage and whatnot. So this is kind of that, but it's a different flavor of that. How much, you know, what would you be willing to help people understand that you went through? Like, what is abandonment trauma and what is the sexual trauma? Like, what happened, I guess, is the question.
Sure. So this is obviously a condensed version, the Reader's Digest version. It's not, you know, there's so much detail that goes into a person's stories and the nuances. But when I was 7, my parents started going through a difficult time. And my dad wanted to reconcile, but apparently my mom didn't. I'm the youngest of 6 children. We all have the same parents. My brothers and sisters are quite a bit older than me. So I was kind of a little bit of a late life child. I was born when my parents were 35 or 36, which now that's not late life, but back in the 60s when I was born, it was late life.
Yeah, a lot of people are starting out now at that age, aren't they? Literally, first child at age 35.
Yeah. So when I was 7, my parents were trying to decide, and they decided to reconcile, except my mom decided that instead of reconciling, she was going to leave. She just happened to take me along, and she ended up leaving me on an acquaintance's front porch and left. And I really basically never saw her again until I was many decades older than that.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Grandmother myself. So, and I never heard from her. She never contacted me. There wasn't a birthday card. There were no phone calls. There was no contact. She did contact one of my older brothers, but I never knew that. I mean, because like I said, I was a lot younger. So I ended up somehow back at my own home. And that's kind of part of the trauma response is fractured memories. Most of those are healed, but I couldn't tell you for sure whether that lady took me home or my dad took me home. But ultimately, I ended up at my home. And
when you say your home, what do you mean? Like what home?
The parents' home, my parents' home, the home that I was part of.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So somehow on that day after my mom left, I got back there. And that sort of is where my story fractures, if you want to call it that. Life really went downhill. I woke up I went to sleep in one family and I woke up in one that was very different the very next day. And there's a lot of talk about fatherlessness and the traumas that it causes in the world today, but people don't often talk about what losing a mother does at a young age. When you lose a mom at a young age, you also lose your father for the most part. And especially when there's marital trouble and then other spouses get involved, it gets very messy very quickly. That I didn't understand what had happened to me. In a way, I felt like it was my fault. And I didn't even consciously bring that to the forefront of my mind at 7. I was thinking about cartoons in school and playing outside, right? What was the next great thing my mom was going to make for dinner, you know?
Simple things. Yeah. I mean, the typical things we all wonder and remember. Yeah.
Well, what I wasn't aware of is that broke my truster. I call it. I say that broke my truster. And I had abandonment issues. I didn't know who was going to leave me next. And my older sister, who was 10 years older than me, she moved to another state shortly thereafter, and I had been very dependent on her. So she left as well. The rest of my siblings sort of scattered to the four winds because they were old enough, and it just left me at home.
Yeah, like who was the adult of the family home that you got returned back to? I guess the siblings were kind of hanging out and around and whatnot, or
They were I had one sibling who still lived at home, and my parents were the primary adults. But like I said, that situation was really shifty at that time. So theoretically, it was my dad
yeah.
who was the adult, but I say that theoretically.
Okay.
He was pretty caught up in his work and another woman, and I honestly don't know because I was
Yeah.
7.
Well, and you know, that's something that we see, as you know. I mean, you call it fractured memories, and I think that's a perfect term, you know, because, you know, memory, I mean, we all kind of have fractured memories. If you think back, you know, we'll ask the question, well, what was which one of your earliest memories of relationships or whatever? And you really kind of think back. I mean, I think back to when my family got divorced and stuff, and it makes me wonder, like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that, but how old was I? Like, I couldn't even tell you right now exactly how old I was when my parents divorced. I'm not sure. I have a time frame around it, but and when you throw trauma on top of that, it's like I like to tell people it's almost like Mother Nature that kicks in when something's too emotional. It's just like, okay, boom, it's not there.
Yes.
It's gone.
And it wasn't very long after all of that. So there's abandonment, and that starts functioning in your psyche, because it wasn't like I had this family who all of a sudden came around me and made me feel like everything was going to be okay, even though this weird thing happened. Everybody was pretty much on their own, including me. And so I lived in this house now with just my dad. And then you brought a woman in who had a kid, and all of a sudden there was this other family. And I was part of this other family. And so right on top of abandonment, that stepbrother began sexually abusing me. What do I know? I'm 8 now. And so, and I know that not because I know I'm 8, but because I can look at the timeline, and I've asked years, when did this happen? You know? So
Piecing together the fractured memories. Yeah.
And I created a timeline for myself, and through healing, a lot of that has been repaired. You know, there has been order brought back to those memories. So, and of course, you have someone come in who's a stranger, and sexual abuse starts happening, and you've never been exposed to anything like that. I had lived a fairly innocent life, right? It wasn't like today where you can access all kinds of stuff at an accidental click, right? So that also began happening, which was also traumatic. And it was combined with physical violence from him. If I told or whatever, since his mom and my dad left us alone all the time, he would physically hurt me, like beat me up.
Right.
If I even thought about telling what was going on. So
or
I
threats or threatening this and that and the other, and emotionally, you know,
Yeah.
sabotaging, and a lot of that kind of goes on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, all of that. And I don't know how he was pretty young too. He was maybe a couple years older than me. So I don't know how he learned how to do all of that manipulative stuff. And I don't even think about, you know, how he learned that, but you know, he learned how to manipulate me into silence. So very quickly I learned people leave, nobody cares. Somebody's going to hurt you. And what is even all this sex stuff, right?
Right.
What the hell is that? Excuse my language.
You got it, sister. You say what you want to say. Yeah, because it's amazing when you get these life lessons that you learn, and you learn them, and so and then you have to unlearn them in some ways. Does that make sense?
Totally. And so I developed a false self that was very, very funny. Being the youngest, of course, being the entertainer is often the role you play in the family. Oh, look, she's so cute. Oh, you know. So I had that, but I developed that as a really strong false self. That and kind of tough. And when I got to a time in my life, I spent most of my time alone. And so I would isolate. all the time. I was in, and so the nasty thing about trauma is once you've received a wound like that and you haven't received any kind of healing for it, like there's been nobody who comes around you, the adults in your life when you're a child, trauma tends to pile up, and things that maybe wouldn't traumatize you, that maybe for other people are exciting and happy, are traumatic for you. So the next thing that happened when I was 9, they shipped me off to live with my siblings in another state.
Okay.
And in preparation for them following, which was great. I was going to my siblings and they loved me, but it was also trauma because I'm abandoned again.
Right.
My parents don't want me.
Yeah.
And so
what you said right there too is really important, because a lot of times people don't understand that. I don't even think I've talked about it on the show, but I like to think of trauma when I'm working with people. Like you just said, it can stack on top of each other. We've talked about the difference between simple trauma and complex or compound trauma on this show before, but I like to think of it as concussions. And we're learning a lot about concussions nowadays with the NFL. When you have your first concussion, you got to get really impacted. I mean, something's got to happen, but that second concussion can happen easily. And by the time you get to the third or the fourth, man, you've really got to be careful, because your emotional system with trauma, if you will, is very susceptible to these types of reactions and responses.
absolutely, especially if you haven't had any reinforcement of healing of any kind. There's no,
Right.
even an uneducated parent can love their kids and bring a measure of emotional or mental healing to them. When that's not happening, things just pile up. And so by the time I was a teenager, I basically had 2 emotions that I functioned in. Any emotion I felt shunted into, guess what? Anger or fear.
Right.
If I felt afraid, then that shunted over into anger. I began to mask that with humor. And I was really good in school. That was one thing. I had a great mind. So I lived a lot in my mind. I wasn't a typical emotional female. I mean, unless you made me mad. And then I was like,
Yeah.
and that led me to getting involved and married to a man who was, and when you're stuck in trauma and you get stuck in trauma, if you don't have help getting yourself out, period. I don't care if you're the most mentally tough, perfectly healthy individual. If you are traumatized and you don't have help, you will get stuck at some point in that.
Fair enough.
So then you have that pattern of choosing things, right? There's no such thing as an unexpressed emotion. So even if you're only feeling fear and anger, you have all the other ones too. And feelings are what drive our actions and our choices.
Right.
Thought, think, feel, act.
Right.
Right. So I ended up gravitating toward an abusive man who was my first husband, and we had our kids together. And it was basically like living a combination of all of the trauma that I'd ever had.
Golly, yeah.
Sexual abuse, physical abuse, abandonment, gaslighting, all of those kinds of things.
Right. Domestic violence involves, a lot of the emotional and physical, attacks essentially. Yeah.
Right. And it was because it was what I expected from life.
And maybe new.
Because I was stuck in my trauma. I wasn't around anybody who really understood how to help me. And angry young women are scary.
I can attest to that. Wow. Yeah, what a statement. Let's circle back just a second to create some hope in this. And then I want to transition as well as you're there in that point in life, how we transition to reaching out and whatnot. But circling back for just a minute, there's an important piece of hope there. I forget how you put it just a couple of minutes ago, but being alone with it and not reaching out and not having that happen naturally. But you said something to the effect of, a loving parent or a friend or a loving person, I might even broaden it to, can simply ask, check out, and talk directly to you about, hey, what happened? What's going on? This started, honestly, by a simple and direct question that I would encourage people to understand, what happened to you? And people are afraid to ask that question, right?
Sure.
Husbands are afraid to ask their wives. Parents are afraid to ask their kids, believe it or not, in a lot of ways. Now, you wouldn't think that on the surface, but the truth of the matter is we're afraid to do more damage. We're afraid to be, judgmental. We're not wanting to, we don't know what to say, so we don't say anything. I guess what I'm saying is, it is okay to ask. Is that a fair thing to say?
That is a more than fair thing. That's a very just thing to say. You don't have to know how to fix the problem to be a good listener and to provide a safe space for someone just to say what happened to them.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And there were a few safe people in my life throughout this process and journey who I was able to tell a few things to. Never the big things, right? Never like the deep, dark secret of sexual abuse. Until I was in my 30s, I actually denied that there was sexual abuse because
right.
What do you do with that, right?
It's just what is. It isn't abnormal. It's just what I experienced. And everyone experiences this because I haven't checked it out with anybody. There's all kinds of thinking, right?
Well, and even if everybody, because there is a high percentage of females, 40% who tell, right? There's 40% of women who experience sexual abuse, but those are only the ones who are telling. And
I'd submit into their men have gone through all kinds of things. As a matter of fact, the Me Too movement, I haven't been able to successfully launch it, but maybe someday we'll get to the He Too movement. Really?
Fair. I totally agree. Sexual abuse among, that's committed on young boys, they never tell. Very rarely. You maybe have a statistic of 10%. So we all just sort of neglect, the sexual abuse among men. The thing is that men tend to not open up to women about that. And another man may not be safe to talk about that. And that's a crying shame.
Absolutely.
So not to neglect the men, but I'm not a man.
I'm not a woman, by the way. We're going to make all that clear.
So, there were people along the way who showed me deep kindness, who listened to me, and they helped take care of needs that they could meet. There was a teacher, and he noticed that I couldn't see, so he moved me to the front of the classroom.
Yeah.
And then he called my dad, and he said, "You get this girl glasses." And my dad said, "She doesn't need glasses." She's like, she can't see. And I'm telling you, get her glasses. So he helped me get to where I could have glasses and see, which helped ease some of that neglect trauma that was happening in my life. My needs weren't real, right? I didn't have real needs, but he saw that I did. Those small acts of kindness planted stakes of hope that you would be surprised how inside I clung to those.
Absolutely. It's huge.
Little touches of hope that meant, someone does see me. Someone does see that I have a need. And so when I was about 14, I actually met the woman who would later become my counselor, much, much later. And she's the one, her name is Donna Bianchi. She lives on Maui. And she was first a teacher. And then in my 20s, she became a pastoral counselor specializing in healing. And one day she called me up and she said, "You need to do this." I'm 28 or 9 by this time. And she had stayed in touch with me since I was 14. And I'm like, why? And we were talking about this the other day, Chris. Doesn't everybody react like this to these situations in life? And she was like, no, they don't.
Right. Right. It seems like that you go on and turn a corner here. And I think I want to pause in the middle of our show and come back from a break and look at like, okay, yeah, now we're reaching out and now I want to get to like, telling your story and turning into the hopeful recovery from all of this. And before I do that, you also said something that's absolutely striking and huge there. And I'm reminded myself from you took me back to a conference where we were talking about the most painful thing that you can experience in life. And we were guessing as good participants and therapists, it might be a death of your mother, or, oh no, it's the death of your kid, or this event or this loss or that loss. And she said, no, you know what? The most painful thing that we can experience as human beings is being invisible, like not even being seen, essentially.
Yes.
And trauma does that. It isolates us. It leaves us alone so that no one, you can feel like people don't even see me.
Right. That's very true. I broadly categorize it like this. There's neglect trauma and there's abuse trauma. When we're talking in this kind of scenario, there are other kinds of trauma, but when we're talking about emotional abuse trauma, I broadly categorize, there's the abuse trauma where someone is hitting you or sexually abusing you or hurting you or calling you names or yelling at you, all of those. But at least you're there. You're an object, right? You are present. Someone is committing acts against you.
Yeah.
Then there's neglect trauma. That's how I categorize it. Your needs are not important. You're not spoken to. Or if you are spoken to, it's in an abuse form, right? I joke around and say, I used to think my name was Get Wood, but
right. Okay.
Yeah. Did you get the wood?
Get wood. Oh, that's me.
Yeah, me. That would be my job, and your needs are not met. You speak up even and you have a need and you're ignored. Not because someone can't pay attention to you right now, right? Because in parenting, sometimes you can't meet your kid's need right this minute, but you look at them and you say, I hear you, I see you, I know you have this need. As soon as I can, I will meet it, right?
Yeah.
When that is not the response, when you say, I can't see, and no one even acknowledges that you made that comment, or my leg hurts, or, I broke my finger once, and it's like, yeah, well, you're going to live, or I'll cut it off.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we talked about on a show, with attachment issues and attachment theories and stuff. It's not really, I want to say attachment realities, right? We learned about in Russian orphanages and orphanages around the world, when babies didn't have the care and attention, neglect, if you will, they just didn't have hugs or physical touch. They just died. We were created to have our needs acknowledged and met, primarily by our parents. It's a powerful hurt. Craig, let me check in with you before we jump into the break, man. What are you hearing, from your perspective and dealing with stories and things like this? And, as we've talked about trauma recently, I just want to kind of check in with you right before the break and kind of what you're hearing, what you're thinking.
There's just a lot going on there. It's an interesting story. And I'm really interested to hear about the turning point about this lady that we're going to hear about soon.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take a break and we'll be right back. So on this break, we are highlighting the new, what do we call it, Mr. Graves, the partnership with BetterHelp.com. What is BetterHelp.com?
It's more an affiliateship.
Okay.
Yeah, BetterHelp.com is an online therapy. What is it, Chris? It's really a way to meet a therapist, right?
Yeah, it's an online therapy service where you go to throughatherapist's.com, kind of helps the show out, helps to make this show free. And you click through the counseling tab and they give you a survey. They hook you up with a therapist. As you know, I advocate for things that I believe in. And I wouldn't have believed in this before the pandemic. This is 2020 and I've got a new perspective. I've talked about it. What's the new perspective and what do you see from that?
Yeah, so your perspective on online therapy has changed. So you were against it and now you're for it.
For it. Let's get back to the show. All right, so Miss Leslie, so Yeah, we want the turning point, right, Craig? What do you see coming?
I'm looking. I don't know yet, but I'm waiting to hear the story.
So how do we turn then? It was this we turned around in Maui, and how did this get you out into the, out of the isolated state that we can get into so intently?
Well, it helped that I had a history with my friend who became a counselor. So there was even though I had a broken truster, there
Love
was
that phrase, by the way. That's an awesome way to put it.
It's true. By the time that she was reaching out to me with this, I would say that my truster was non-existent. I just, and I didn't even know it. I didn't know everyone didn't operate that way. So this was in my 20s before I moved to Maui. I was still married to my first husband, and she just began reaching out with information that she had learned on pastoral healing of trauma, emotional and psychological wounds. Some circles call it inner healing. Some circles call it soul healing. Some circles call it healing prayer. Some circles call it lots of things. And there are people everywhere. There's a whole spectrum of theories, everyone from Dr. Larry Crabb all the way over to Leanne Payne, who deals more on the spiritual side of things, Elijah House Counseling, Sozo Counseling through Bethel Church in Redding. There's a whole gamut of people who operate in this realm, more of a spiritual aspect to the healing. And she just began talking to me about it. She had me read some books, which I didn't understand because I was locked down. I'm telling you, I was tight. I was locked down, but she just kept at it. And when I'd get something, she'd see that crack, and she kept after me for over 20 years on a regular. She kept after me. Probably the first 15 were the most dramatic. I had a lot of things built up, defenses built up around my heart, in my mind, patterns of thinking that were natural given the circumstances.
When we were talking the other day, you talked about building walls to protect your pain. I thought that was a great way to put what you're talking about here.
Well, that is exactly what people do. We build walls around our emotions. We build walls in our mind, and we do it to protect ourselves. But the thing about walls is they're not selective. The thing you build to keep stuff out keeps you locked in. You can't get out. And you may have built that wall, but you need help tearing it down brick by brick. And so she was relentless in her pursuit of my heart and of my healing. And she helped me tear those walls down brick by brick. And then she helped me come out and of that. And she helped me see that there was another way to be, so I wouldn't build walls again. Boundaries are beautiful. Walls are bad.
Right. And, I want to make a comment about the relentlessness. It struck me as you said that, because I get an idea of what you're talking about. And we help people with trauma in the helping professions, right? Which you help others. You're relentless, and I'm relentless as well. But let's look at what that means. Honestly, to me, the phrase just staying present,
yes,
is relentlessness, exactly. Right?
Standing firm and holding space for someone, listening to them, being present with them is a relentless form of love.
Wow, that's an awesome quote.
Mm-hmm. So, and we would talk. Well, here's how it would look. She would call me up and we would talk. And the Holy Spirit would alert her to something I said. And she'd say, "What about that?" And I'd be like, "What about what?"
That part of the story or that part of the thoughts? Yeah, direct, right?
Right. And she was never afraid of my prickliness. I was very prickly. She was never afraid of my, "What do you mean?"
Nothing.
What? She was never afraid of that. And So we would talk about that, and she'd say, that tells me that you have a hurt underneath that. And somehow we would get to the hurt, and I'd be crying at the end over this thing that I had suppressed, I had locked down, I had just functioned around in my life. I wasn't living in my own life. I had so many off limits areas to myself in my mind and in my heart that I wasn't really living my own life. There's a quote that says, if you don't plan for your life, someone else will. I just kept accepting other people's plans for my life because, there was this measure of helplessness. Even though I appeared tough and even though I appeared competent, there was a lot of helplessness, because when things like that happen to you as a kid, it cripples your ability, if you don't have help right away. So she just, over time, and we would pray through those things together. We would see that they were real, that there was a place for Jesus in them, and she would also direct me on certain things to someone who was licensed as a therapist, not just as a minister or a lay counselor in a church. But honestly, with her relentless presence in my life, I didn't need that very much, because all of a sudden there was a line. There was someone I could trust, someone I could talk to who was not afraid. And that was the thing. She didn't always have the answer right away, but there was space for that. And sometimes we'd have to revisit things over and over and over. Some years I would get stuck in the same thing, bitterness about something, and I couldn't get through it. And we would just keep showing up and keep showing up and keep showing up till, after about 20 years of relationship is what it was. And even still to this day, we work together, sometimes on our stuff and sometimes with other people. But that relentlessness to pursue someone's healing, sometimes just showing up and letting them cry. And if they say, I'm not ready to deal with it right now, I just need to talk about it, that was what happened.
Yeah.
And yeah.
There's certain, I've talked about it before, various trauma rules, so to speak, whenever trauma comes up and we're dealing with it in the therapy experience. And it's funny. I mean, I'm not going to cover them here. Listen to the last show, I think, or the show before that one was definitely, we spent some time on that. Like, dude, you are hitting them. you are hitting exactly the things that need to be in place for a person to be able to, to manage these things. Can we switch a little bit? I think we need to go and get your Amazon International best-selling author book for sure, Craig, entitled "Renew Your Mind and Transform Your Life," because you're living it, you lived it, and I wonder, did you when you wrote that, did you pull some of what your relationship with her was into those thoughts?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thankfully, what's become ingrained in me now in this part of my life is healing, right?
Is what?
Is healing.
Healing.
So healthiness, I have a foundation of that in my life. Trauma is my reactions to it are no longer the foundation of my life.
Pause right there. Let's focus on that, because that is powerful. Can you say that again?
I can. Trauma and its effects on my life are no longer the foundation of my life. The health and healing and the hope that comes from that is what I plant my feet on. That's the platform that I stand on now. It's a whole lot sturdier.
You think? Yeah. And I wanted to pause right there and highlight that, because listen, anybody that's out there listening that's experienced a trauma reality, I would like to say, I don't have a lot of passivity in me, and I'm very active, when I'm working with people or even thinking about things in my own life and in my own heart. Like, dude, you don't have to sit back and let this happen to you. Like, that's powerful what you just said. And you take power. Like, it has owned way too much energy in life, whatever it is referring to, and doesn't have to be anymore going forward. Does that sound fair?
That is more than fair. The past doesn't always determine and doesn't always have to determine your future. I thought I would be stuck in that place. And there was a place in my healing journey that I thought I had gone as far as I can go, and I'm still going to be this miserable wet rag of a person. But that is not true. I have experienced the growth of a normal human being in my life. I am happy for the most part. The past is behind me and it hasn't changed. Nothing about the past has changed. It all still happened to me.
Always
right?
still with us, isn't it?
Right? But the sting has gone out of it for the most part. The thorns and the wounding have been pulled out one by one, and those places in my heart and my mind have healed. So I don't think always like a person who has been wounded and traumatized. I think like a healthy person. I think about my life in a healthy way. I have hope for my future. Not that I don't have frustrations and bad things happen to me, but the resilience factor is 10 billion% bigger than what I was living with before.
It's almost shocking, I would imagine, when we look back at where we were and where we are sometimes now after you go through a process like the recovering of that kind of stuff isn't it amazing?
Sometimes it's almost like it happened to somebody else.
Yeah, yeah.
And not in a bad disassociative way where
Right.
that happened to somebody else. No, that really was my life, but it doesn't determine my future and very rarely my present. And now I know how to walk through that. I know to reach out. I'm struggling with this. And the time for recovery is minutes instead of days, weeks, months, or years. It's like, oh, right. That's already, there's a healthy foundation in there. We just need to deal with this little
Right.
And not everything is a trigger anymore. It used to be that certain words and phrases, certain people, certain thoughts were triggers for me and would send me into this emotional state. And
let's broaden that out to where, people that are in first responders or in military experiences, we learned about that with Vietnam, and the PTSD is where we really started to study this closely. And, and understanding that you flash back and the triggers and all of that, this happens with trauma, medical events, like we talked about in the beginning. So we circle around and we get to, what's that?
Childbirth.
Wow. Yeah. I'm a guy and I know nothing about that, but yeah, seriously, that's traumatic. That's absolutely traumatic. So what does Acre, how did your relationship with your primary helper, and by the way, the other people that listened and whatnot, you go through, and we talked about it a little bit the other day. I just thought it was a really cool, simple, quick, and neat, and you outline it in your book and whatnot. Tell us about ACRE, what that stands for. What is Acre?
So I believe your mind is like a garden, and the thoughts that you cultivate or fail to cultivate will either make your mind like a beautiful English country garden, or it's going to be like a vacant lot full of weeds and crap. Maybe literally crap, maybe mostly junk. Okay, junk.
I love metaphors, Leslie, and I could think of some pretty bad concoctions of garbage and junk and stuff that we could have in our garden. So yeah, that works.
Right. And it all revolves around choosing. Most of us walk around when I was writing my book, I was doing some research. 95% of the thoughts that we think every day are, 1, unconscious, and 2, about the past. 95% of our thought life is unconscious, repetitive thoughts about the past. That's a lot of freaking thoughts about the past.
It's a lot of energy.
That's a lot of energy. And it's unconscious, so it's sitting there rolling around in the back of our mind. Our thoughts, there's that famous quote by Gandhi, be careful of your thoughts because they become feelings, feelings become actions, actions become habits, habits become your destiny, right? Or whatever people attribute it to. That's a lot of mental energy that is not harnessed, and it's not serving you. So if you have a repetitive thought about your past, or you have a repetitive thought about yourself, let's just think of this. A woman walks in front of a mirror. She's taking a shower. She's getting ready for her day. And she has an almost unconscious thought of, God, you're so fat. Right?
Right.
Almost unconscious. Or you're not as young as you used to be. Think of a thought like that. Is that thought serving that woman? Is that doing anything? No, that's a vacant lot thought. And you got to tend this space right here. You got to be on it. You got to be weeding it. You got to be watering it. And that's where the metaphor and the acronym ACRE comes from. Tend your acre, tend your thoughts. So I used for A, arrest and assess. And I did that because the words awareness, bringing awareness to a thought, is a little bit overused, and people go, oh yeah, mental assent to that idea, but they rarely stop and think about it. But really, when I say arrest and assess, I want you to bring attention and awareness to your thoughts. Driving down the street, what are you thinking about? Arrest and assess that thought. Capture your thoughts throughout your day, right?
Kind of like little windows into what is going on, right?
In between your ears. That's the first step. And then you have to choose a thought. You want to choose a thought that's not serving you. Let's go back to the one about the woman looking at herself in the mirror. I'm so fat. Is that thought serving you? No, that's a thought I would choose to look at and examine and assess it. Choose it. And you need to change it. That thought is not going to bring you good fruit in your life. It's not going to help you lose weight. It's not going to help you be younger. It's not going to help you be more beautiful. It's not going to help you at all. In fact, it's a demoralizing and destructive thought. So you need to choose. I would not directly say this to someone. I would lead them to this conclusion, help them to come to this conclusion on their own. But they need to choose that thought and change it. That's the C in ACRE, part of tending your acre, renewing your mind, one thought at a time, changing it, right? And helping it to, choose that thought. Sorry, I have to.
Yeah, you're talking about reframing and replanting and redesigning your process.
So you choose that thought that you want to reframe, a thought that's not serving you, and you want to reframe it and then replant, right? That's the R in ACRE. You want to, all right, so sometimes changing your thoughts are a simple flip. How about, you can flip that, or you might have to actually completely redo the thought, remake a thought, craft a new thought that you're going to replace the old thought with. If it's a simple flip, instead of saying to yourself, I'm so fat, how about this? Boy, I live in a body that's accomplished a lot. Right? Mm-hmm. So we want to reframe those thoughts.
A little bit of a redirection. And you can do that with your own thoughts and yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely. So a flip. Or if you want to craft a totally new thought, how about I am strong, I am fit, I am lovely, right? However that works for people, it works differently. This is just a guideline to help people with understanding this process. Then you replace that old thought. Every time you think, oh, I'm fat, after you've reframed it, you replace it with the new thought. I'm strong, I'm fit, I live in a body that's accomplished a lot, right? And then E in ACRE is for express and execute. Thoughts are changed by expression. Say it out loud, write it down. Overtraining, that's something that you overlearning. You think it, you say it, you write it, you read it. Think it, say it, write it. All of those things over and over and over. So that's express and execute. And over time, that thought's going to be different.
You know, what's awesome about that, as we were talking about it the other day, is, that's cognitive behavioral therapy. We could put whatever names on it. And Craig, I'm sitting here thinking of you with what you guide people through with the Unbeatable Mind program, right? Do you hear the language? What are you thinking over there as we talk about that?
It's very similar. It's almost the same.
Right? What are some of the languages that you hear with the Unbeatable Mind?
Yeah, we would say witness. So witness the negativity, and then interdict to stop it, with some kind of a power statement, and then redirect it into a positive place using self-talk and imagery, and then maintain with a mantra or a jingle. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally the what works. And we know that people can recover from whatever experiences that you've had. And it's cool to see the different ways. And you know what? I don't care what way you can latch onto it. Call Craig, call Leslie, call Chris, call somebody, right? To engage in active process of recovery.
That's right. And you can transform your life. You can. You reach out, you find someone who's willing to relentlessly hold space and be present for you, someone who can give you some hope. You can use Craig's tools, you can use Leslie's tools, you can use Chris's tools, you can use somebody else's tools, and you can transform your life. As we were saying the other day, we were talking, I like it down and dirty. Don't give me a lot of fluff. I don't always have a lot of time. So that's why I didn't design it. I was in a moment of self-induced trauma. I was frustrated. I was crying. I couldn't figure it out. So I latched onto a gratitude practice, which is something that you can do in 2 minutes to bring yourself out of an elevated, unproductive state into a state of gratitude where you're receptive to good things, right? And I had just learned that. So I brought myself into a gratitude practice, breathing. I decided to focus on water. I tell that story in the front of my book. And that's where I got the download for the Acre Mindset Renewal Tool.
That is super cool.
Out of this state, right?
Hey, great things come out of the crazy moments. Craig, I just realizing a little bit ago, I almost feel like we monopolize the time. We need to taxi in a little bit here. You questions, thoughts. I mean, what are you thinking driving through this, man? I apologize. I think we just got into it, and I'm like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting story. It's a lot like Stephanie Fast in a way.
I've been thinking about her. Yeah,
similar story, Leslie. If you've ever heard her story, but you mentioned your faith. When did that come into play in your life?
Well, I grew up going to church like a lot of people of my generation did. We went to church every Sunday. And so I had heard about Jesus my whole life. And it wasn't a foreign thing to me. But when I became a follower of Jesus when I was 15. And I wish I could see that changed everything, but it didn't. The reality is, I had a lot of stuff that I had to deliberately work through, but at least I had now a framework that I could do that in. And that started when I was 15 and became a follower. That's when I started encountering truth and noticing that what was happening in my life, either through the people that were around me or what was happening inside me, they didn't match what I was hearing in that relationship with Jesus. And bit by bit, as my understanding and my knowledge grew, I was able, through different people, primarily my mentor, who started, really grabbing hold of me in my 20s, I was able to start applying those principles in a real way in my life. And so I am a follower of Jesus, and he has my full attention every day.
might be an easy thing to be able to say that there's no one as relentlessly present as certainly the Lord can be, right?
That is, yes, nailed it. He is relentlessly present.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I like what you said too about your life didn't change right away, because I think a lot of the message that we hear from preachers, whoever, is find Jesus and things will be peachy. It's not always the case, and people get frustrated and say, well, this is a bunch of BS, and they fail, they go down a different path.
Yeah. So, I continue to screw up my own life even after I met Jesus.
Right. Yeah.
I think I was on Santa's naughty list for a long time while serving Jesus.
Exactly.
So real quick in winding down too, and I know you have a journaling class that you had talked about that you do. And, I don't know, where are we at on time, Mr. Graves? I think, Craig, we're probably running a little bit. I mean, it's important enough. And I want to hear what your thoughts are real quick about the journaling class. And I want to tell the story that I think demonstrates really, really strongly that as a tool with whatever tool you jump onto. But as with all of us, I had a sleepless night one night. It's been several years ago now, and it dawned on me what happens when you journal. When I think you said the exercising and executing, you write it and then you write it, and it becomes more accurate, right? So I wasn't sleeping well one night, and stuff was on my mind, and I got up and I'm like, all right, Craig, let me practice what I preach, right? So I went down and I wrote out my thoughts and what was on my brain, and wrote another paragraph and went back up and read it and changed that sentence. And I thought, oh, well, that's not accurately. Let me change that sentence. That was too mean. And then I wrote another paragraph and, then I read it through and I reorganized it, and I put the last paragraph first because it was nicer and, thinking through things, and read it through and I edited it and I read it through and I edited it again. But then I read it and I added a little bit, and I read it and I read it and I read it. And I was kind of like, okay, you know what? It's there. It's done. It's fine. And the very next thing that I did, you might not be shocked, is I went back to sleep.
Imagine that.
Right?
Imagine that.
Right? Go ahead and I know you got to get the tablet and we'll knock that out. And then so, honestly, Craig, what happens though is, goodness, you don't realize it, but when you're just circularly thinking, you just keep on doing that. All the work that I did that night, what happened is, under normal terms, you're just going to rethink it and rethink it and rethink it. And you get super circular with it because you don't want to forget or finish the work that you did. So when I thought back on that day or that night, and I realized like, wow, okay, dude, that's what journaling does, is it allows you to, to keep the work that you did like in real terms, in real time. It was super, super cool. You need a break or are you good?
I'm good. I'll be good here in a minute.
So yeah, it was neat to think about how that worked out. And I'm curious, what, you do that in a group as with other things, when you talk to people. I'm just curious a little bit real quick about the journaling class and what kind of, if you talk about the basics of what you guide through that, because that's a really neat thing.
Well, one of my favorite quotes is, "Thoughts untangle themselves over lips and through pencil tips."
Wow. Say that again. Another quote.
Thoughts untangle themselves over lips and through pencil tips.
Dude, Neil, you got to remember that one. Write that one down. I got to keep that one. We'll have to, that's it. That's awesome. Say what you mean about that.
Not original with me. It's one that I've heard other people say. But so talking through the lips, thoughts untangle themselves. You can have, when you have someone who is holding space for you, relentlessly being present, oftentimes thoughts that you've been stuck in, as you talk through them, untangle themselves. They become clear. You get clarity, right? And oftentimes clarity is what we're looking for. Journaling can provide the same thing. Thoughts untangle themselves through pencil tips as well. So while journaling is not a replacement for relationship or therapy, it can super augment and speed up both of those things, right? Relational help, therapy help. And one of the things when I used to help facilitate sexual abuse recovery groups, I used to live in Alaska as well. I've lived in Alaska and Hawaii by choice. I'm not in the military.
Nice.
Yeah.
I might choose that as well if I had the chance.
You just think so. No, just kidding.
Oh, maybe not.
But so there's ways to journal. The thing that you should avoid in journaling, I want to cover this first, is venting. Just talking about the event over and over and over and over again, rehashing it, we've all heard people who can't get past the event. They just talk about it. Every conversation leads back to that same thing.
The word
That's
rant comes to my mind.
It's venting or ranting, and really all it is re-abusing yourself through reliving the same trauma over and over and over again. Real helpful journaling, no matter what method you use, helps lead you out of that. It talks about how you feel about the thing. So I used to use a format called Journaling for Healing. Again, the context was sexual abuse recovery groups. And it was a very short form of journaling. It was 20 minutes, 4 times a week. And you would have a trigger, let's say an event, a thought, a feeling. You would write that down, and for 20 minutes only, you would talk about how you feel, what that felt like, how you feel now. Just lead yourself through a process of formalized journaling, 20 minutes. Then if you still could not get out of that feeling that the trigger gave you, you had to call someone and talk to someone about that. You had to reach out. That was the rules of that journaling class. And there's some more specific things, but there are also journals where you talk about what you're thankful for, what you hope for your day, what you're working on, and how you're feeling, right? There are so many ways. There are visual journaling.
Yeah, there's a lot of listing and journaling and writing, free speech or free writing. And, I think that maybe the thing to think about is if you're, it's just one of many things to do to kind of make it real and crystallize things a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is never a replacement for therapy or relational healing. It always needs to go in conjunction with those two things.
That's a really good point. Yeah. You don't want to be, again, you could be alone. You could do this alone and whatnot, but you really want to reach out, be connected, attach, get help.
Yes. Get help and share your journal in a safe place. Maybe
Keyword.
not every safe, in a safe place with a safe person. You never want to just lock those journals away if you're in a place where you are, because that's not safe for you. So yeah, that's the journaling class that I used to teach, is Journaling for Healing, specifically for sexual abuse. But it can be used, the methodology of 20 minutes, 4 times a week, recalling a memory, bringing out the thoughts and the feelings that you had at that time, maybe the sensory perceptions, how you feel now, and what you want to do, but only spend 20 minutes and then shut it and move on with your day.
So we need to taxi in for a landing here for sure. Craig, I think, like I said, that's exactly what they have in your process and work, in Unbeatable Mind, right? I mean, we've talked about it. It's funny that you've gone through it with us and, you've been able to kind of talk about it. I mean, that's part of your activity and is journaling and whatnot, right?
Yeah, very similar. Gratitude practice, lots of similarities.
Yeah. So do you have anything, Craig, that you want to say or wrap up with or suggest, with Leslie while we still got this amazing lady?
I just want to thank you for coming and sharing your story. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, and I think we should continue the conversation at another time.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, Craig, go ahead.
No, I'd say I agree.
Yeah. So how do people find you? And then I want to do a celebratory clap with you. I'll explain that in a second, but what's the website? How do people find you? How can they reach out?
You can find me at www.leslienafus.com, LESLIENAFUS.com. I have a contact form on my website. It will email me, and you can get in touch with me right there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and other places.
All the other places, I know, right? Pinterest and Twitter and, oh my God, we've done some social on social media lately. Listen, one of the things that I like to do when people are courageously coming on to talk with us and share, which, I mean, listen, I echo Craig's sentiment. I'm so grateful that you're willing to kind of talk about these things, because people that don't talk about them feel alone. And anytime you share your story, anytime you're talking about it, it's absolutely a potential, literally, I don't want to be too dramatic, but life-saving reality for anybody that ever hears these messages. I mean, that's what we're doing today. And I'm super appreciative of you being willing to do that. And so we're far away. We're going to give a high five is what the clap is, right? So a high five to me is a really cool signification of like a connection. And so from across all of these states, I'm going to count us down from 3, and it just signifies like a thank you and a well done and an attaboy kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So on 3, we're going to clap. 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Appreciate it. I really, really do. Anything you want to say in conclusion?
Just thank you so much for what you guys do. Through a Therapistized podcast is something special. And I want to let everybody else who's listening, keep listening to Chris and Craig and Neil, what they have to say. You need help, reach out. You are not alone. There are people real people that you can get in touch with if you are having any kind of help issues, you need help with anything. Chris and Craig are 2 of them. You can email me. And if we can't get you the help you need, we will help you find someone who can. You
Absolutely.
are not alone.
Absolutely. Super well said. Again, appreciate it. Hope everybody's having a good holiday season. I know they can be stressful. We've had a hell of a time in 2020, man. Hang strong. We're getting through to the other side. 2021's right around the corner. But we thank you for listening, and we will see you all next week.